we're recording now. So thank you all. Thank you very much for joining today's first webinar of the STM article sharing framework. It's today me, Esther at Elsevier, talking, as well as Dan O'Brien at the ACS. For those who don't know me, I'm Esther. I'm Business Development Manager at Elsevier, and I've been involved in the article sharing framework since 2019, and I'm chairing the STEC group under STM that has been tasked with developing the tools needed for publishers to meet their obligations they have under Article 17 of the EU Copyright Directive. So that's why I am here. Dan is in this STEC group, and Dan, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, there's my mute button. Yeah, so I'm Dan O'Brien with American Chemical Society. So I've been working with Esther for a little over a year, I think now, putting this framework together with some support from several folks throughout the industry. And I'm representing the technical side of the implementation of the framework.
Then the agenda of today. So first of all, I will talk a bit about the what of the article sharing framework. So the rationale for developing it and a high-level overview of the scope of the framework. Then Dan will follow up with, as mentioned, the technical know-how, the technical details of the framework. It will still remain a bit high-level because we will use the workshops that will take place in 2 weeks' time to really go and do a deep dive into the technical things. Then, of course, we'll point you to the resources where you can find that you can find on the ASF webpage, and so the implementation guide, the spreadsheet, FAQs, and so on, and a little bit about the current status of the framework and timelines. Of course, we will reserve time for questions and answers. So the article sharing framework. So globally, many debates are taking place as to what role platforms should take regarding the content they offer or host. In the EU, a first step to regulate this environment was taken with the EU Digital Single Market Directive, the DSM, as it's often referred to. The DSM was approved by the European Commission in 2019, and it must be implemented in the EU member states by June this year. So that's just 2 weeks from now. Then this new piece of legislation, and it's Article 17 specifically, present a clear opportunity for platforms and the publishing industry to work together to enable the safe use of protected content and to ensure a better experience for platform users. Article 17 clarifies that when certain types of platforms give the public access to user-uploaded protected works, this engages the rights holder's exclusive right to communicate to the public. Now, this makes a platform potentially liable for copyright infringement unless it either obtains or makes best efforts to obtain an authorization from the rights holder to upload protected content, or to ensure the unavailability of any protected content for which rights holders have provided relevant and necessary information. But in any event, expeditiously take down content on receipt of notices and take best efforts for this content to remain down. Now, although the bulk of responsibility lies with the platforms, Article 17 puts an onus upon rights holders, so publishers, to supply platforms with this relevant and necessary information. This to ensure that platforms can fulfill their obligation on the upload of protected works. To ensure the publishing industry meets this obligation to platforms, STM assembled a working group under STEC to develop the technical tools and processes needed for this. These are described in the article sharing framework. It's important to note that the framework is not a solution that platforms can plug in. The framework is an implementation guide, an industry standard that describes how publishers can provide the relevant and necessary information and how platforms can utilize that. I'd like to emphasize that the article sharing framework is not an upload filter. The information platforms obtain through the framework enable them to share content in a legally compliant way. But ultimately, it will be up to the platform to decide as to whether to allow the upload or not. Nothing in the operation of the framework can technically prevent that from happening, and so there's no automated blocking. Now, what constitutes the relevant and necessary information that publishers are required to provide under Article 17? Here we need to consider researchers' sharing habits, so the different article versions they share, the different motivations they may have to share those versions, the different platforms they may choose to share their articles on, and publishers also having specific policy for each of them. In light of this, platforms require tools to easily identify the article version, and subsequently the applicable sharing policies for a given article version. The trick here is for publishers to ensure this information is provided in a machine actionable form so that platforms can obtain and act on the information automatically and in real time. So the framework is the industry standard about providing the information that publishers are required to provide under Article 17. Let's briefly zoom in on the scope of the framework. The framework has been designed for platforms covered by the new obligations set by Article 17. This concerns online content sharing service providers, or OCSSPs, as they are referred to in the directive. These are platforms that are typically commercial in nature and that make available large amounts of content to the public. The policies expressed within the framework are therefore focused on these platform types specifically, and as such, it excludes personal blogs or websites, as well as institutional repositories. These are explicitly not in scope. The DOI and the journal article version, so the JAV, can be embedded in any journal article PDF. But as part of the framework, publishers are required to deposit sharing policy indicators for content that typically does not bear a Creative Commons license. As such, the framework applies specifically to subscription and open archive content. However, as the framework builds on existing industry standards, this means that when platforms would look for the sharing indicators, they would look at the same metadata section in Crossref as what they would do to identify Creative Commons licenses. Publishers decide themselves whether they want to make the relevant and necessary information available for their front files or for their back files too. Though first focus may be on getting this set up and running for new content, as this is what researchers share typically most. It is incredibly important to keep matters manageable for platforms and to enable them to automatically implement and use the information that publishers provide. Now, given that there are over 5,000 academic publishers worldwide, and with that a likelihood of a huge variety in policies, having these publishers coalesce around a limited set of policies is of great importance and value for publishers, platforms, and researchers. Now, also, many publishers have yet to define their sharing policies, or they may want to revisit what they've got currently. And many may want to use this opportunity to align their policies with what prevails in the industry. Being able to choose from a set of policies that have been carefully defined by colleague publishers may be really helpful. Now, although STM's sharing policies are limited in number, publishers can be reassured that they offer flexibility for every publisher to set a wide range of policies. This includes the ability to set different policies for accepted manuscripts and the version of record, or for sharing publicly versus for collaboration. So the framework is scalable to a variety of sharing contexts. This, however, also means that the framework will not allow publishers to express custom policies. That would really weaken the value of potential. For the article sharing framework to work, publishers are required to embed additional metadata into places where they include metadata already. That is, in article PDF and Crossref. As such, the costs incurred are expected to be limited and likely mostly related to labor required to set up the initial processes that are thereafter fully automated. For platforms, the following elements are needed: software to extract metadata from the article PDFs, which is often available open source, and access to Crossref's metadata API. This API is available free of charge, yet for a better performant API, one is required to pay a modest fee. However, it's not expected that platforms suddenly need this better performant API in light of the framework to work. The article sharing framework is the result of a cross-community collaboration. Stack members have been able to find an elegant and relatively simple solution to a complex problem without having to build new technical infrastructure. The framework is built upon two existing and adopted standards, this being the NISO journal article version and the NISO article and article and license indicators, so ALI, recommended practices. It also involves Crossref. And because of this, we expect this will ease any challenges of implementation. The article sharing framework is also an agreed standard specific to our industry. This because it considers some unique aspects of academic publishing. For instance, the sharing of different article versions, as well as the sharing purpose. So sharing in a research collaboration group for collaboration, or for sharing for general access. For instance, when authors want to showcase themselves and their work to a global audience. By the way, as this is all about enabling responsible sharing, implementing the framework is a logical next step for those parties that have endorsed the STM voluntary principles for article sharing that was published in 2015 or so and has been endorsed since. The development work for the article sharing framework is now in its final stages. An update to the NISO's ALI recommended practice will soon be made available to NISO members for review. And it's based on this that Crossref will update its XML deposit scheme. The framework was announced at the STM Spring Conference end of April because we're so keen to engage with publishers and platforms outside the STEC working group. And this is why we're now starting those webinars and workshops, of which this is just the first, just because we want to build recognition and support for the framework and ensure a successful rollout across our industry. Although the framework results from a working group under STM, it's by no means intended or meant to be used by STM members only. And that's why we also reach out to sister associations. And we are therefore very happy and pleased that we will be on tomorrow's SSP's May conference with a poster session. Any information and documentation around the framework is available on the STM website, which includes the integration guide that Dan will show in a second, and the FAQs and so on. To round off, I would like to mention a few things about the framework. The framework is simple yet pragmatic. All information provided is machine identifiable and as such can be easily implemented and used by platforms in order to check article shareability in an automated and a real-time way. Also, it is scalable. It can be implemented at low, zero cost and is available to anyone who's interested to use it. The framework is built using existing industry technology and practices. Despite limited in number, the STM sharing policies enable publishers to set the policies precisely the way they want for their content. As publishers rally around this limited set of policies, it ensures implementation by platforms is manageable, which is of great importance. Also, as part of the article sharing framework, platforms will obtain all sharing options for a given article version, meaning platforms could identify alternative sharing options should they want it. Either way, the information provided through the framework is always clear-cut and unambiguous. And lastly, which I also mentioned at the beginning, the framework is not an upload filter. Platforms choose themselves whether or not to use the information they've obtained through the framework. I will now want to hand over to Dan to let him show you the how of the article sharing framework for both publishers and platforms.
Great, thanks, Esther. Let me share my screen here and
stop sharing.
While I'm getting this set up, I will apologize in advance if I drop off. I've been having some internet issues and I have a hotspot standing by just in case it goes south. But fingers are crossed. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you, Esther. And as Esther conveyed, where this is going to be a high-level implementation walkthrough. It's not meant to dive into a lot of technical details. That's what the workshops will be for. But certainly happy to answer questions at the end if you have some. At its core, the framework is pretty straightforward. It's a publisher makes information available within the article PDF and makes sharing indicators available within Crossref. As Esther said, this constitutes the relevant and necessary information that publishers provide for the platform providers. When I mention platforms to the rest of this presentation, I'm going to refer to them as the OCSSPs that Esther mentioned earlier. So that's how I define platform in this presentation. A reminder, this framework is targeted towards subscription article sharing. So it complements what is in place already for open access license indicators. And you'll see that as we walk through this. So the publisher does two basic things. The publisher adds information to the PDF to identify the article. And the publisher also will deposit sharing policy indicators into Crossref. Then on the platform side, the reverse happens. The platform extracts the identifiers from the PDF to identify the article, and then uses that information to look up sharing policy indicators within Crossref. We're going to go one by one on each of these just for a moment. So a publisher adds identifiers to a PDF. And as Esther mentioned earlier, there are two parts to this article identification: the article DOI and the general article version, the JAV. JAV is a NISO recommended practice. There's a reference to it here. And there's multiple JAV values defined within that NISO recommendation, but our framework uses 3 of those. And the primary focus is actually on the version of record, although we also support accepted manuscript and author original. 2 methods to encode this information into the PDF. The most prominent method that most folks are probably used to is adding that as metadata within the PDF's XMP metadata section. Here's a screenshot that shows a DOI and an article version within an ACS PDF. Many publishers have been doing this for several years. It's probably the easiest to implement. However, there's a limitation on this method. One limitation is sometimes that XMP metadata can be dropped by the time the PDF finds its way to a platform. Also, older PDFs may not support XMP. So as a auxiliary, a supplemental encoding method is to add the general article version to a DOI hyperlink on the first page of the article PDF. What you see here is an ACS article. In the bottom right, we zoom in, we see a DOI hyperlink. What's displayed on the page is just the DOI, but if you hover over this hyperlink, you'll see there's actually more information encoded into it. There is the journal article version as well in a machine readable form. So ACS is doing both methods. Publishers need to do at least one method to encode the article information into the PDF. And there's 2 implementation methods for publishers to do this encoding. One option is when the PDF is produced. This is probably best when articles are being created during production, paginated by their composition system. I find that most publishers already add metadata to their PDFs, title, author names, in a machine readable format. This is just another 2 fields added at that step. Another point is right at the point of delivery to the end user. ACS is doing a combination of both. And why? Because we did not want to go back and update all of our older PDFs and change them. We wanted to inject this metadata right at the point of delivery. So that was encoding the article identifiers into the PDF. Now we'll talk about publishers adding sharing policy indicators to Crossref. There are 4 sharing contexts, and we won't talk through all these in detail here, but there are 4, and each one has different combinations. If you add up all these different combinations, that adds up to 48 different permutations of contexts. The journal article version is the same that we just looked at. This is what's encoded into the PDF. Each permutation of sharing contexts equates to 1 sharing policy. And these sharing policies are expressed as a DOI. So you can see an extract of a table that shows the different permutations here and the different policy DOIs on the right here. Later, we'll look at a resource that contains this information for you to look at. So one step that a publisher would need to do is assess their own publisher sharing policies and map those to the article sharing framework DOIs. As an example, and I won't dive into the details here, but this is Elsevier's and ACS's sharing policies in a nutshell. What I want you to look at is the green. Elsevier allows sharing in more contexts and therefore has more article sharing framework policies mapped. ACS allows sharing in less contexts. There's less green, so uses just these article sharing framework policies. Again, we're focusing here on subscription articles, not open access. Okay, once a publisher identifies the sharing policies that apply to them, then they deposit those sharing policies for every article that they publish or have published into Crossref. So a given article may have multiple sharing policies registered within Crossref. This is similar to how many publishers are already using Crossref to register open access licenses with Chorus, for Chorus. It's the same record structure within Chorus. Now we're just registering a access indicator for sharing policies instead of an open access license. And it's possible, this is complementing the open access licensing. Publishers for the same article could register both with an embargo. For an example, a publisher could indicate that upon publication, this sharing policy applies, and 12 months later, an open access license applies. So that was the publisher. On the platform side, it's a lot of the same information, just extracting and looking up. Again, the platform would examine using freely available technology, open source technology available, to examine the article PDF and extract the article DOI and JAV from the PDF using either method. And shortly, I'll show you how the platform would use that to look up information in Crossref. To support platforms, we've developed a very simple proof of concept, a functional proof of concept that illustrates how this can be done with not too much coding. So next, we'll look at how platforms will look up the sharing policies. Up here in the orange, we will pretend that a platform has extracted the article DOI and the JAV from a PDF. Next, a platform will determine the applicable sharing contexts. Is the platform signed or not signed with the voluntary principles? Is the intent to share with a global audience or just a research group? Is the intent to share the full text or just a subset of the article? Determining these four contexts will determine which sharing policy the platform will look for within Crossref. Using the Crossref API, the platform will look up the article DOI and determine whether their intended sharing policy is present. In this case, it is. If the article sharing policy is present, that means the article can be shared. In this case, this is showing a different sharing context, global audience, and you can see policy 001 is not present in this simulation. So that in that case, the article may not be shared by the platform. So this is intended to be a binary yes/no answer for platforms. But as Esther said earlier, the information is also present that if a platform wants to see what is allowed, they can retrieve these sharing policies and determine what sharing is allowed. So to recap, publishers put information into the PDF, just the DOI and JAV. Publishers deposit sharing policies, just like they are probably already are with open access license indicators to Crossref. Sorry. And then the platform will extract that information and use it to look up sharing policies. A lot of thanks went into this. Vincent, who's on the call here, provided a lot of technical support for this framework development. Miriam, Evan, Jeff, Patricia, Todd, Nettie, Jeff, Matt, and all the groups within the STEC article sharing framework and the NISO Poly Revision Working Group. Thanks to everybody. We're almost at a question and answer, but before we do that, I want to show some timelines and resources. What can publishers and platforms do now? Right now, if you're not already doing this, publishers can start adding the JAV and DOI to your PDFs. Let's get them in there into the PDFs so that they're available to be extracted by platforms. Platforms can start adjusting their import systems, their PDF ingestion systems, to extract the JAV and the DOI from the PDF. Coming later this year, Crossref, as Esther said, will be making a tweak to their metadata schema to support some OLI, some access library indicator changes to support this framework. After that, publishers and platforms can start using Crossref as the mechanism to assert and retrieve sharing policies. Resources available are at this website. I'm going to flip there in a second here. And I will also encourage you to check out courses implementation guides, because it also covers how publishers and organizations can integrate with Crossref for license and sharing policy indicators. Okay, I will switch over to, this is STM's article sharing framework site. And the resources I'm going to point you to are mostly here towards the bottom. There is an integration guide, and there is an FAQ. I encourage you to check this out. This has a lot of good information that Esther and team have provided. And there's also some I'm going to add to here a chorus implementation guide link when we have that defined. Here is the article sharing framework implementation guide. I'm not going to run through this here. I do want us to walk through the table of contents. This is one guide for both the publishers and platforms. And you'll see the topics here. I don't know if you can see this. Make it bigger. The topics map pretty closely what we just talked through in the presentation. The different methods for encoding, extracting, sharing rights from Crossref. Also available on that resource page is a spreadsheet as a resource tool. This spreadsheet contains all permutations of the sharing policies and assigned DOI for each. It also defines each context. So what does it mean for a platform type to be platform signed? What does it mean for full text? So these are all defined here. And another tool here is if you are looking to set up your own set of article sharing framework policies, here's a lookup tool. Choose the values that apply to your situation, and it shows you which DOI and the policy text that results. The sharing policies are all live on article sharing framework portion of the STM's website. These are not meant to be used in practice. They're here for documentation, but it's just the presence of the sharing policy itself within Crossref that makes this automation possible. With that, I think we are concluding the presentation portion and ready for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Dan. If we go back to your PowerPoint, yeah, this one. I just wanted to add that since 2016 or 2017, there have been 7 publishers that have been adding the JAV and DOI to the PDF XMP section. This being the ACS, Springer Nature, Wiley, Taylor & Francis, Elsevier, IOPP, and AIPP. Now, everyone tags the VOR, so the version of record. Some also tag the accepted manuscript. But all in all, we estimated about 45% of the annual output of STM content includes this information in the XMP already. And we hope to grow that number very fast, very soon, of course, yeah. So questions, concerns, comments, suggestions?
If you have questions, feel free to take yourself off mute or type into the chat.
I had just one. This is Dave Schott from Copyright Clearance Center, and I just had one, I guess, clarifying question. You know, we obviously manage a lot of rights, and I was trying to think, is there a hard line between, you know, the 48 different variations of sharing between, you know, the platforms and the hosting, I don't know what you call the hosting entities, and then the rights to use those materials by the end user obviously differs from the rights of the platform to access and share the documents. So is the intent that, for instance, a platform that wanted to represent both or properly represent their own ability to, you know, share those documents, but also inform the user of what they can do with them, they would need to, for instance, ingest both the license, say the Creative Commons license information and the article sharing framework data and combine those kind of in how they make those choices. Is that the right way of kind of interpreting how those two things may work together?
I think it's really important to take into account, and please Dan or Mathilde, correct me if I'm wrong, that the rights, the permissions expressed through the framework are really explicit to the platform as to what the platform
right.
can allow their users to do. Now, clearly, if that's an open access, a CC BY type license associated with it, the platform can look it up and make that possible for the user. If it, however, concerns a subscription article for which the platform is in question, so a commercial platform in this case, because this framework is geared towards OCSSP, so the platforms that are typically commercial in nature, it would not allow the user to share that subscription article publicly, but it might allow the user to share it in a private research collaboration group. So it's really about the platforms, on what the platforms are allowed to host on their platform, on their sites.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yep. Other questions?
I hope that means it was just really clear.
Do you have any sense? I mean, it's obviously gonna, the redeposit going backwards. What, we had the same issue a little bit with OA, although that was somewhat of a go forward, at some point in recent-ish metadata history. But for this going backwards, do you have any sense, from those publishers that you said are, 75% already have some of this information? Do you have any sense from the, when people are committing, are they talking about how aggressively they may be depositing data backwards?
I think that the publishers have currently implemented JAV and DY in the PDFs. They have very much focused on forward content, so new content. As they have been tagging it since 2016, they've covered the last 5 years or 4.5, 5 years already. As ACS is doing, like stamping the information the moment the article is fetched from one's platform, that is something that those publishers could consider as well. This versus publisher reproducing the PDFs, that might be a really costly thing to do. But I think all in all, they will focus on recent content, as that's also typically what's shared most.
Yeah.
They could go back doing it the way ACS did. With regard to putting that metadata in the sharing policy information in Crossref, again, I think that the primary focus will be on recent content, on new content. But I do know that Crossref is capable of making bulk updates to content, but probably that would have to be scheduled to be done. But so far, from what I've heard from publishers, is that their primary focus is on new content. So there are possibilities for back content as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
For ACS, we haven't decided how far back we will go. If it wouldn't surprise me if we decide to go back, say, a year of most recently published content and add like sharing policies that far back, as an example.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Sujata Anandan from IEEE. I have a question. So for the back content, it's just in addition to what David Scott just asked. For the older content, if you're submitting, if you're uploading the PDF, updating the PDF with all this version and all that, how would the platform will get the new version of the PDF with the VOR and other details? How would they get it? Whatever they
Sure.
already having is an older version of the PDF, isn't it?
Sure. So there is no mechanism right now to push a new version of the article to the platform. So we really are asking publishers to start adding this information to their PDFs now. So when platforms do get going and they're looking for this data, there's already some out there. As Esther said, there's 40-some percent, 45% already has this information in play. So we're not starting from ground zero out there. But there's not a mechanism to force platforms to refresh their corpus.
Yeah. So what's the point in doing the older data?
So the point is then that if it's fetched from or downloaded from your website as of today going forward, that it then includes that information.
That's right.
Okay.
In that sense, what's out there already is then damage that has been done already.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. So the one more question, maybe this is silly and I didn't understand the whole concept. If there's a third-party content that we are hosting as a publisher, let's assume, so how does this ASF gets implemented as a publisher? Should I worry about that? Anything I should implement for third-party content?
You've got an agreement in place with that third party, right? To host on your
Yeah.
site. Yeah. Then this does not apply.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Any questions?
Hey Esther, this is Bratari, and I just did a small presentation with our business group and about the sharing policies to get them familiar with that. So they had some questions about they need further definitions. What is a signed platform versus an unsigned platform? And today I saw you had some resources describing the distinction between the two. I'll share that with them, but they might need help finding that answer.
Absolutely. So please, we'll make the recording available via the webinar. We can also follow up and send information to this group via an email. So to make sure you also have the links to the information that Dan just presented. And then I would welcome those people, those colleagues, to join the workshop session in 2 weeks' time so that we can help and guide them through this.
Sure.
Esther, I was thinking we had a actual whole separate document with the definitions. Is that online on our resource page?
Not sure if it's on the public page, but if it's not, I'll make it available there.
Sure. Okay.
Well, I guess that's it then for today. Ben, what do you think?
Thank you, everybody, for your time. And if there's other questions, please feel free to send those to Esther or myself or to the ASF@STM email address.
Yeah. And or suggestions about how we can improve this webinar are most welcome as well.
Absolutely.
And I thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much.
Questions, and let's keep in touch.
Thanks, Esther. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.